The door handle turned with a metallic whisper that seemed to echo through dimensions. Liam Carter's calloused fingers gripped chrome that cost more than his monthly salary, and for one suspended heartbeat, the universe held its breath. The door swung inward on hinges engineered to silence, revealing a space that shouldn't have been his to see. Marble floors stretched beneath feet that had never known such luxury. Afternoon light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting everything in shades of gold that felt borrowed from a different reality. And there, framed against the cityscape like a Renaissance painting, interrupted mid-stroke, stood Ariana Sterling. Her back was to him, shoulders bare above white silk that caught the light like water. Dark hair cascaded down her spine in waves that moved as she reached for something on the dresser. The formal dress lay discarded across a chair, midnight blue fabric pooled like spilled ink. Her reflection flickered in the window glass, a ghost image that would haunt him for reasons he couldn't yet name. Time fractured into shards of crystallized awareness. The work order crumpled in his other hand, his boots on immaculate marble. The sudden devastating knowledge that he had crossed a threshold that couldn't be uncrossed. Liam's breath caught in his throat, trapped behind teeth that wanted to speak but couldn't form words. She turned, their eyes met across 15 feet of imported Italian stone, and Liam watched something die in her expression. Not anger, though that would come. Not shock, though that was present too. Something older, deeper, a light going out behind her pupils like a city during a blackout. Her hands moved to close the blouse, fingers trembling with a palsy that spoke of muscle memory, of a body that had learned to protect itself before the mind could catch up. The word left her lips barely above a whisper, more breath than sound. Don't. Liam stumbled backward, his shoulder blade connecting with the doorframe hard enough to bruise. The words tumbled from him in a desperate cascade, tripping over each other in their urgency to explain, to justify, to somehow undo the damage already inflicted by his presence. I didn't know, the work order said, equipment room. I thought. The alarm cut through his stammering like a blade through silk. High-pitched, insistent, a digital scream that announced his transgression to everyone within 5 floors. Somewhere in the building's nervous system, protocols engaged with mechanical efficiency. Security feeds activated. Alert messages fired across encrypted channels. Elevators redirected toward the executive level. Heavy footsteps thundered down the corridor with military precision, the sound growing louder with each second. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs, a trapped bird beating itself against cage bars. He raised his hands instinctively, palms out, a gesture of surrender that felt inadequate against the magnitude of his mistake. 2 guards rounded the corner in formation, tactical boots, eating distance with practiced speed. The first one had a jawline that could cut glass and eyes that had seen things that made a maintenance worker in the wrong room barely register as a threat. His hand closed around Liam's bicep with a grip that promised pain if resistance was offered. The wall was cold against Liam's cheek, the pressure point hold professional and impersonal. His field of vision narrowed to textured wallpaper and the geometric pattern of crown molding, expensive details he'd never noticed from this angle. Hands behind your back. Don't move, don't speak. The second guard positioned himself between Liam and Ariana, a human barrier that blocked his view of her. Somewhere beyond that wall of muscle and tactical gear, he heard fabric rustling, the soft click of a button finding its home. Miss Sterling, are you all right? Do you need medical assistance? Silence stretched like taffy pulled too thin. Liam pressed his forehead against the wall, closing his eyes against the crushing weight of humiliation. In his mind, Mia's face materialized, her gap-toothed smile, the way she tucked her chin when she was shy. He'd promised her macaroni and cheese for dinner. He'd promised to help her finish the castle drawing. He'd promised so many things that depended on him having a home, having an income, having any kind of future that wasn't shattered by this moment. We can have him removed from the premises permanently within 10 minutes. Police can be here in 5 if you want to press charges. The words fell like stones into still water ripples, spreading outward through Liam's consciousness. Removed. Police. Charges. Each syllable carried the weight of consequences that stretched beyond this room, beyond this building, into every corner of the life he'd rebuilt, brick by fragile brick, over the past 3 years. Ariana's voice, when it finally came, carried an edge he couldn't identify. Not quite anger, not quite fear, something threaded through with confusion and calculation. Take him to the main security office. I want full access logs reviewed before any decisions are made. Nothing happens until I've seen the complete records. The guard's grip shifted, confusion bleeding into his professional demeanor. Miss Sterling, are you certain the protocol for unauthorized entry? I'm aware of the protocol. I wrote the protocol. Take him downstairs, now. They hauled Liam away from the wall, his boots finding purchase on marble that suddenly felt as slippery as ice. The hallway passed in a blur of expensive art and polished surfaces, everything moving too fast and too slow simultaneously. He tried to catalog details to fix this moment in memory so he could explain it later. Prove his innocence, demonstrate that he'd been set up or cursed by cosmic coincidence or anything except what it looked like. The elevator descended with hydraulic smoothness that made his stomach flip. One guard stood on either side of him, close enough that their shoulders brushed his. Neither spoke. The silence was its own form of interrogation, pregnant with unspoken accusations and conclusions already drawn. Numbers descended on the digital display each floor, a countdown to something Liam couldn't quite envision. The security office existed in his mind as a vague threat, a place where bad things happened to people who crossed invisible lines. He'd never imagined seeing it from the inside, much less as the subject of an investigation. The doors opened onto a level of Sterling Tower he'd visited only once during orientation 6 years ago. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, harsh and unforgiving after the soft gold of the executive floor. Gray carpet absorbed their footsteps, making their approach toward a glass-walled office silent and surreal. Inside, monitors covered 3 walls and a grid of security feeds. The building's circulatory system made visible hundreds of cameras capturing thousands of moments simultaneously. Liam caught glimpses of himself in multiple frames, distorted by angles and compression, a stranger wearing his face doing something unforgivable in high definition. Sit. The chair was metal and uncomfortable, designed for temporary occupancy. Liam lowered himself into it, hands gripping the armrests to stop them from shaking. One guard remained by the door, arms crossed, expression carved from granite. The other moved to a console, fingers flying across keyboards, with the confidence of someone who lived in digital spaces. Pull everything from 51A. Timestamp from 3 hours ago to present. I want door access, hallway cameras, elevator logs, and work order dispatch records. The screens flickered and reorganized, data cascading across black backgrounds in green text that looked like something from a movie about hackers. Liam watched his own day play out in reverse time, running backward through mundane tasks that had seemed so normal just hours ago. Him replacing a circuit board on the 23rd floor, checking voltage in a junction box, eating a sandwich at his workbench while scrolling through a message from his mother about picking up Mia. The footage jumped to the 51st floor hallway, empty and pristine. Time code raced forward, seconds bleeding into minutes. Nothing moved except the occasional flicker of light through distant windows. Then the feed cut to static, a sudden eruption of white noise that made the technician lean forward, brow furrowing. That's not supposed to happen. The second guard moved closer, studying the screen over his colleague's shoulder. Equipment malfunction. Maybe, except the feed comes back exactly 38 seconds later, right before he reaches the floor. They watched the static clear the hallway, reassembling itself pixel by pixel. And there was Liam, stepping into frame with a work order in his hand, looking confused and slightly lost. He watched his past self check the door number twice. Knock once, wait. The angle captured his uncertainty, the way he shifted his weight from foot to foot before finally reaching for the handle. Freeze that. The image locked. Liam's hand extended toward the door, face turned slightly toward the camera. The guards zoomed in, enhancing the reflection in the chrome handle. Something flickered there, distorted by the curve of metal, but visible enough to plant seeds of doubt. Is that... Run it back. Give me the 30 seconds before the static. The footage rewound, time flowing backward until Ariana appeared, walking into frame from the opposite direction. She moved with purpose, her stride confident, everything about her body language suggesting a woman in her own territory, unchallenged and secure. She approached 51A, but the angle made it impossible to see if she used a keycard or if the door was already unlocked. She disappeared inside, and exactly 4 seconds later, the feed dissolved into static. Someone cut the signal. The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. Liam's chest tightened, a vice grip of implications squeezing breath from his lungs. The guard's eyes found his face reassessing with cold calculation. You're telling me someone tampered with our security system? I'm telling you there's a gap in the footage that coincides exactly with when Miss Sterling entered her changing room. That's not a malfunction. That's deliberate interference. Numbers scrolled across another monitor, access logs painting a timeline in stark data points. The guard pointed at a line highlighted in yellow, his expression hardening into something between confusion and alarm. Door 51A was opened from the inside at 14:47:32. No external keycard registered. No entry code used. Someone triggered the release mechanism manually from within the room. Liam's mind raced, trying to fit pieces together that refused to form a coherent picture. He'd arrived at the door at what, 14:47:30, maybe 14:47:35. The timing was too precise to be coincidental, too calculated to be random chance. Someone was in the room before me. The words escaped before he could consider whether speaking was wise. Both guards turned toward him, their attention sharpening like predators catching a scent. What did you say? Someone was already in the room, that's the only explanation. They opened the door from inside knowing I was coming, knowing I'd walk in at exactly the wrong moment. The guard at the console pulled up another screen, this one showing work order dispatch logs. Green text scrolled past too fast for Liam to read, but the technician's expression darkened with each passing line. The work order was generated at 14:23:15:47 minutes before the incident. Standard technical support request, routine maintenance code. But here's the interesting part. He pointed at a flag in the metadata, a small notation that glowed red against the green background. This was entered using a deactivated employee account. Someone who technically doesn't work here anymore logged in and created a fake service request, one that would send a maintenance worker to 51A at exactly the time when Miss Sterling would be vulnerable. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressure building like a thunderstorm, gathering strength. Liam felt it pressing against his chest, making each breath a conscious effort. He'd been used, manipulated, turned into a weapon bomb aimed at someone he'd never even met before today. Who was the employee? The account was deactivated 18 months ago. Security clearance revoked, building access terminated. But someone reactivated it, remotely used it to bypass our dispatch protocols, then deactivated it again. They knew our system well enough to exploit it without triggering automatic flags. The guard who'd held him against the wall upstairs crossed to a phone mounted on the wall, lifted the receiver with deliberate care, and pressed a sequence of numbers that probably connected directly to somewhere Liam didn't want to imagine. This is security level 1. We have a situation that requires executive oversight. Tell Miss Sterling we've found evidence of deliberate system compromise, internal sabotage, and possible stalking behavior. She needs to see this immediately. Stalking. The word detonated in Liam's consciousness like a grenade shrapnel of implication, tearing through any remaining coherent thought. This wasn't about him, had never been about him. He was collateral damage in someone else's campaign of psychological warfare. The minutes that followed moved like cold honey, each second distinct and torturous. Liam remained in the uncomfortable chair, forgotten by the guards who huddled around monitors, pulling up layer after layer of digital evidence. He caught fragments of their conversation, technical jargon mixed with grim professionalism. Find out who owned that account originally. Already on it. Name's David Reeves, former IT specialist. Left the company under unclear circumstances. Define unclear. HR file is sealed. Executive override required to access. Get Miss Sterling down here, now. The elevator chimed and Liam felt the air pressure shift as someone entered the security office. He didn't need to turn around to know it was her. The guard's posture changed, spines straightening, shoulders squaring, deference radiating from every pore. Ariana Sterling moved into his peripheral vision, and Liam kept his eyes fixed on the floor, studying the pattern in industrial carpet like it contained secrets of the universe. She'd changed completely, the white blouse replaced by a black suit that transformed her back into the billionaire CEO who commanded empires from corner offices. Her hair was pulled back severely, not a strand out of place, armor reassembled with professional precision. Show me everything. Her voice carried none of the tremor from upstairs. No hint of the vulnerability he glimpsed in those crystallized seconds before the alarm triggered. This was a different woman, or perhaps the same woman wearing a different face, layers of protection built over years of navigating boardrooms where weakness meant destruction. The guard stepped aside, giving her clear access to the monitors. She leaned forward slightly, studying the static-filled footage with an intensity that made the air around her seem to vibrate. Her reflection ghosted across the screens, transparent and insubstantial, a woman made of light and data. 38 seconds. You're telling me someone cut our security feed for exactly 38 seconds? Yes, ma'am. The timing corresponds precisely with when you entered your changing room. Whoever did this knew your schedule, knew your routine, knew exactly when you'd be most vulnerable. Ariana's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath skin that looked porcelain in the harsh fluorescent light. She moved to the next monitor, examining the work order logs with the focus of someone reading a death threat. This account, David Reeves, former IT specialist. He left the company 18 months ago. The circumstances are sealed in an executive HR file. Something flickered across Ariana's face, too quick for Liam to identify, but significant enough to make the guards exchange glances. She straightened, turning away from the monitors, and for the first time since entering the security office, her eyes found Liam's face. The impact was physical, a collision of gazes that sent electricity down his spine. She studied him with an intensity that felt invasive, like she was peeling back layers to examine the architecture of his soul. Liam met her stare, refusing to look away despite every instinct screaming at him to drop his eyes, to submit, to acknowledge the vast gulf of power and wealth and consequence that separated them. Mr. Carter. His name from her lips felt strange, too intimate for the formality of the situation. She moved closer, stopping just outside his personal space, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something expensive and subtle that probably cost more than his car. I owe you an apology. The words landed like bombs in the quiet security office. Both guards stiffened, shock radiating from their postures. Liam's brain stuttered, trying to process a reality where billionaire CEOs apologized to maintenance workers who'd stumbled into their private moments. You were set up. Someone used you as an unwitting participant in what appears to be a coordinated harassment campaign targeting me specifically. You're a victim in this situation, not a perpetrator. Liam found his voice rough from disuse and stress. I should have knocked harder, should have verified. You knocked. You followed protocol. The door opened because someone wanted it to open. Someone who knew I'd be alone, vulnerable, in a state of partial undress. Someone who sent you into that room at precisely the moment that would cause maximum distress for both of us. She turned back to the guard's authority, settling over her shoulders like a cloak. I want security doubled on all executive floors. Full audit of our access systems, every account active and deactivated. If there are other vulnerabilities, I want them found and sealed. And I want to know everything about David Reeves within the hour. Miss Sterling, should we notify the police? This constitutes stalking, possible prelude to assault. No police, not yet. I won't give whoever did this the satisfaction of creating a public scandal. We handle this internally first. The guard near the door shifted uncomfortably. With respect, ma'am, if someone is targeting you, law enforcement should be involved. This is beyond corporate security protocols. Ariana's expression could have frozen flame. I've dealt with men who thought they were entitled to my vulnerability before. I won't let fear dictate my response or turn my company into a circus for tabloid consumption. We investigate quietly, thoroughly, and when we have irrefutable evidence, then we consider external involvement. She turned back to Liam, her expression softening fractionally, ice thawing, to reveal something almost human underneath. Mr. Carter, I'm releasing you from any suspicion of wrongdoing. You're free to return to your duties. However, the pause stretched pregnant with implications Liam couldn't quite decipher. I'd like you to consider a temporary reassignment. I need someone monitoring the technical infrastructure on the executive floors, someone who isn't connected to our existing security apparatus, someone I can trust because they have absolutely no reason to participate in whatever game is being played here. Liam's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Words failed to materialize, his vocabulary reduced to stunned silence. She was offering him a job, not firing him, not threatening him, not treating him like a problem to be eliminated. Offering him a position that sounded important, official, far above his current pay grade. I don't understand. Why me? Because in the moment when you could have done anything, run, make excuses, try to justify your presence in that room, you just stood there looking horrified. Your first instinct wasn't self-preservation. It was concern for me, visible on your face, genuine and unstudied. That's rare, especially in this building, in this company, in this world I inhabit. She extended her hand, a gesture that felt ceremonial, significant beyond the simple mechanics of the movement. Do we have an agreement, Mr. Carter? Liam rose from the uncomfortable metal chair, his legs uncertain beneath him, equilibrium still adjusting to a reality that had tilted off its axis. He looked at her offered hand, at the long fingers, in unpainted nails, in the faint trace of a scar across her knuckles, evidence of some past injury that hadn't quite healed invisibly. His hand closed around hers, her grip firm and cool, and somehow desperate beneath the professional facade. Yes, yes, I'll do it. Good. Report to my assistant tomorrow morning. She'll have the paperwork ready. Ariana released his hand, stepping back distance, reasserting itself between them. She moved toward the door, then paused, turning back with an expression that wavered between gratitude and something harder to name. And Mr. Carter, thank you for being exactly who you are in that moment, for not being one more man who saw an opportunity and took it. She left before he could respond, the elevator doors closing behind her with a soft chime that sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. Liam stood in the security office surrounded by monitors and guards, and evidence of conspiracy, trying to understand how walking through the wrong door had led him here. The ride home happened in a fugue state, traffic and stoplights and familiar streets passing outside his car windows without registering in his conscious awareness. Liam's hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckle intensity, holding on to something solid, while his mind tried to process impossible information. Someone had deliberately sent him into Ariana Sterling's changing room. Someone with enough technical knowledge to manipulate security systems, enough inside information to know her schedule, enough malice to weaponize a stranger's innocent mistake. The implications spread through his thoughts like ink in water, staining everything they touched. His phone buzzed in the cup holder, his mother's contact photo illuminating the screen. Mia's pickup time. He'd completely forgotten time becoming meaningless in the span between disaster and reprieve. Liam grabbed the phone, nearly dropping it in his haste, fingers trembling as he swiped to answer. Mom, I'm so sorry, I got caught up at work. His mother's voice cut through his panic, warm and untroubled. Relax, honey, we're fine. I picked her up an hour ago. We're at the park. Mia wanted to show me her new drawing technique. Relief flooded through him, loosening muscles he hadn't realized were clenched. Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'd manage. You always do. But you sound stressed. Rough day. Liam laughed, a sound that bordered on hysteria. You could say that. I'll explain later. Tell Mia I'll be there in 20 minutes. The park materialized around him sooner than expected, time compressing again, his car appearing in the parking lot without him consciously navigating the route. Muscle memory autopilot, the same path he'd driven hundreds of times, distilled into unconscious routine. Mia spotted him before he'd fully exited the car, her small form launching off the swing with reckless abandon. She ran toward him with 7-year-old velocity, all forward momentum, and zero regard for the laws of physics that suggested slowing down before impact. Liam caught her, lifting her off the ground in a hug that lasted longer than necessary breathing, in the scent of her strawberry shampoo mixed with playground dust. She giggled against his shoulder, arms wrapped around his neck, with the absolute trust that children grant to adults who haven't yet failed them. Daddy, you're squishing me. Sorry, Bug, just missed you today. She pulled back to look at his face, her green eyes, Sarah's eyes studying him with unnerving perception. You look, did someone hurt your feelings, Sarusham? The question landed like a punch to the solar plexus. How did she do that? How did children see through carefully constructed facades to the raw truth underneath? Liam forced a smile, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Nobody hurt my feelings, just a complicated day at work. But it's better now. His mother approached more slowly, grocery bags hanging from her arms, the universal posture of grandmothers who couldn't visit without bringing provisions. She studied his face with the same perceptiveness Mia had inherited, decades of maternal instinct, identifying distress beneath denial. You want me to take her for dinner? Give you some time to decompress? No, I need her tonight. Need normal. need reminders of what actually matters. They drove home through sunset-painted streets, Mia chattering from the back seat about her drawing and the boy at school who ate paste and whether dragons could really breathe fire or if that was just pretend. Liam made appropriate sounds of interest, half his attention on her stories, and half lost in memories of marble floors and vulnerable eyes, and hands trembling as they closed a blouse. The apartment welcomed them with familiar shabbiness, worn furniture, and scuffed walls and the faint water stain on Mia's bedroom ceiling that he kept meaning to fix. The leak had worsened over the past month, spreading in concentric circles that looked like a target painted on drywall. He'd need to call the landlord again, argue about repairs that technically weren't his responsibility, but somehow always became his problem. Except now, maybe with a new position and whatever raise came with increased responsibility, he could actually afford to handle it himself. Maybe even afford to find somewhere without ceiling stains and sketchy neighbors, and the perpetual smell of someone else's cooking seeping through inadequate insulation. Dinner was boxed macaroni and frozen vegetables, nutrition and convenience balanced on a single father's tightrope. Mia ate with enthusiasm that suggested his cooking was Michelin-starred rather than microwave-assisted. She talked between bites, painting pictures with words about her day, her friends, her elaborate fantasy world, where castles had specific architectural requirements and dragons followed strict behavioral codes. Miss Carson said I could enter my castle drawing in the art show next month. She said it's really good enough to maybe win a ribbon. Pride swelled in Liam's chest, momentarily displacing the residual tension from the day's disasters. That's wonderful, Bug. You've worked really hard on those drawings. Will you come to the show? It's on a Thursday after school. Miss Carson said parents can come and see all the art. Thursday. He'd have to check the new work schedule, make sure his hours allowed for school events. The old position had been flexible in that way, maintenance work easily rescheduled around a daughter's needs. Would executive floor technical support offer the same freedom? I'll be there, promise. Wouldn't miss it for anything. Mia beamed gap-toothed smile, transforming her face into pure joy. She returned to her macaroni with renewed enthusiasm, humming a tune that existed only in her imagination. Liam watched her memorizing this moment, this simple happiness that asked for nothing more than his presence and his pride. Bath time happened with minimal protest, bedtime with the usual negotiation about one more story, one more glass of water, one more reassurance that the closet contained only clothes and not monsters. Finally, she settled into sleep, her breathing evening out into the rhythm of dreams, small body curled around the stuffed rabbit she'd had since infancy. Liam stood in her doorway longer than necessary, watching her chest rise and fall, the nightlight casting gentle shadows across her face. Sarah had looked like this when she slept peaceful and unreachable, inhabiting some interior landscape he couldn't follow. The cancer had stolen that peace, gradually replacing rest with restless pain until sleep became something achieved through pharmaceutical intervention rather than natural exhaustion. 3 years since the funeral. 3 years of learning to be both parents, to answer questions, meant for mothers to braid hair and navigate girl problems and explain why mommies sometimes went to heaven when little girls still needed them. He'd done his best, cobbled together a life from ruins, built something functional, if not beautiful. And today, walking through a door at exactly the wrong moment, that fragile construction had nearly collapsed. One mistake, one coincidence manipulated by unknown malice, and everything could have ended. Job gone, reputation destroyed, custody questioned by relatives who'd never approved of him anyway. All of it balanced on the edge of disaster, saved only by Ariana Sterling's unexpected mercy. No, not mercy, justice. She'd seen the truth, recognized manipulation, refused to let him become collateral damage in someone else's war. That took strength, the kind that came from surviving previous battles. Liam remembered the tremor in her hands as she closed her blouse, the way her breath had caught the look in her eyes that spoke of traumas he could only imagine. Someone was stalking her. Someone with technical sophistication and patient malice, willing to orchestrate elaborate schemes that weaponize innocent bystanders. Someone who wanted her afraid, vulnerable, constantly looking over her shoulder. The thought made his hands curl into fists, anger rising hot and righteous in his chest. Liam retreated to the living room, collapsing onto the couch that had seen better decades. His phone sat on the coffee table screen, dark but somehow accusatory. He should call his mother, reassure her that the day's stress was manageable, nothing that required worry. He should check his email, confirm tomorrow's new assignment, prepare mentally for responsibilities he barely understood. Instead, he sat in the quiet apartment, listening to city sounds filter through thin walls, trying to reconcile the man he'd been this morning with, whoever he was becoming. Everything felt different now, shifted by degrees he couldn't quite measure. The air tasted strange in his lungs. His skin felt foreign against his bones. Reality had cracked along invisible fault lines, revealing depths he hadn't known existed. Sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams of marble floors and surveillance cameras, and doors that opened into spaces he didn't belong. He woke repeatedly throughout the night, heart racing from scenarios his subconscious conjured, each one more elaborate than the last. By the time morning light crept through inadequate curtains, Liam felt like he'd run a marathon in his sleep, exhausted from battles fought in imagination's arena. Mia's morning routine provided structure, her chatter and needs grounding him in concrete reality. Breakfast clothes selection, backpack, preparation. Small tasks that required presence and attention, leaving no room for anxiety about facing Ariana Sterling's assistant with paperwork that would reshape his professional life. The drive to Mia's school happened too quickly, time racing toward inevitable confrontation with changes he'd agreed to but didn't fully comprehend. She kissed his cheek before jumping from the car, backpack bouncing against small shoulders as she ran toward classmates gathering near the entrance. 7 years old and already so independent, already building a life separate from him, preparing for eventual departure that would leave him alone with only memories and photographs. Sterling Tower loomed against morning sky like a monument to ambitions Liam couldn't fathom. 51 floors of glass and steel, each one housing dreams and disasters in equal measure. He'd worked here 6 years, walking these floors daily, invisible to everyone above the 30th level. That invisibility had suited him, fine protection against the scrutiny that came with being noticed. Now he was noticed. Now Ariana Sterling knew his name, his face, the way his hands trembled when confronted with situations beyond his control. Now he was walking toward an elevator that would carry him to the executive level, toward paperwork that would bind him to responsibilities he barely understood, toward proximity with a woman who'd seen him at his most helpless and chosen grace over judgment. The lobby bustled with morning energy professionals in expensive suits, moving with purpose toward meetings and deadlines and crises that justified their salaries. Liam felt conspicuous in his work clothes, jeans, and a collared shirt that was clean but hardly executive appropriate. He thought about wearing something nicer, then realized his entire wardrobe didn't contain anything suitable for the 51st floor. The receptionist barely glanced at him, waving him toward the elevator bank with practiced disinterest. Apparently word had spread, his new assignment entered into whatever system tracked employee movements and authorized access. The elevator accepted his badge without protest, the button for 51 illuminating at his touch. Other people entered before the doors closed, filling the space with polite silence and the subtle competition of professional hierarchies. Liam pressed himself into a corner, making himself smaller, trying to occupy as little space as possible. He watched floor numbers climb, people exiting at their designated levels, the elevator emptying gradually until only he remained. 51. The doors opened onto a hallway he'd seen once before under circumstances that had branded themselves into his memory with indelible permanence. Polished marble, tasteful art, the kind of restrained elegance that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. Everything looked different in morning light, less intimidating somehow, though that might have been wishful thinking, masquerading as perception. A woman waited near the elevator bank, her posture suggesting patience worn thin by excessive standing. She was perhaps 50, dressed in gray that somehow managed to look both professional and approachable, holding a tablet against her chest like armor. "Mr. Carter, I'm Eleanor Hayes, Miss Sterling's executive assistant. She informed me you'd be arriving around this time." Liam stepped from the elevator, hyper-aware of his boots against expensive flooring, the sound they made intrusive and wrong. "Yes, thank you I'm here for the paperwork." Eleanor's expression softened, fractionally acknowledging his discomfort without drawing attention to it. "Follow me. We'll handle the administrative details first, then I'll show you your new work area." They walked down the corridor, passing doors with nameplates that probably belonged to executives Liam would never meet. Eleanor maintained a brisk pace, talking as she walked, explaining protocols and expectations, in a voice that suggested she'd given this speech many times before. Your official title is Technical Infrastructure Specialist Executive Division. You'll be responsible for monitoring and maintaining all technical systems on floors 48 through 51. That includes security systems, communications equipment, environmental controls, and anything else that requires technical expertise. Liam absorbed information in fragments, his attention divided between her words and the route they were taking, trying to memorize landmarks in case he got lost later. That sounds like a lot more responsibility than general maintenance. It is, which is why the position comes with a significant salary increase and better benefits. Miss Sterling wants you to understand this isn't a punishment or a temporary assignment. She's offering you a genuine career advancement. They arrived at an office small but private with a window that overlooked the city from a height that made Liam's stomach drop. A desk held multiple monitors, keyboards, equipment he recognized, and some he didn't. Everything looked new, expensive, far beyond what a maintenance worker normally accessed. This is yours. The credentials for all building systems are on the tablet. Miss Sterling has granted you executive-level access to security feeds and technical infrastructure. She trusts you to use that access responsibly. Trust. The word carried weight beyond its simple definition implications that pressed against Liam's chest. She was giving him keys to the kingdom, access to spaces and information that most employees would never see. That level of trust felt unearned, terrifying, desperately important. Eleanor set the tablet on the desk, then produced a stack of papers from somewhere, placing them beside the electronics with practiced efficiency. Standard employment agreements, non-disclosure clauses, security clearance forms. Read everything carefully. Sign where indicated. Take your time. I'll be back in an hour to collect them. She left before Liam could ask questions, door closing with a soft click that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. He stood in the middle of his new office, surrounded by equipment that represented more opportunity than he'd encountered in years, trying to understand how 24 hours had transformed his entire existence. The paperwork took 40 minutes to review, legal language dense and intimidating, but ultimately straightforward. He signed his name in designated spaces, each signature feeling like a commitment to something larger than job security, some unspoken contract that extended beyond professional obligations into murkier territory. Non-disclosure agreements covered everything from building security to executive schedules to anything he might observe while performing his duties. Essentially, they were buying his silence about whatever he witnessed on these floors. That should have felt ominous, but instead it felt protective, a recognition that people like Ariana Sterling lived under constant scrutiny and needed employees who understood discretion's value. The hour passed, Eleanor returning with the punctuality of someone whose entire existence ran on precise schedules. She collected the signed documents, scanning each page briefly to confirm completion, then nodded with satisfaction. Excellent. Miss Sterling wants to see you this afternoon. 2 o'clock in her office. She'll explain your specific duties in more detail. Liam spent the intervening hours familiarizing himself with the technical systems, pulling up schematics and maintenance logs, trying to understand the architecture of this digital ecosystem he was now responsible for monitoring. The building's infrastructure was more complex than he'd imagined, layers of redundancy and security protocols that suggested someone had designed these systems, expecting deliberate attacks rather than simple malfunctions. He found the security logs from yesterday, tracing the timeline of events that had derailed his ordinary day into chaos. The static gap glared at him from the records, 38 seconds of deliberate blindness inserted into surveillance that should have been continuous. Someone had done this, someone with intimate knowledge of Sterling Towers systems, someone who'd worked here before. David Reeves. The name echoed in his memory, information gleaned from yesterday's security office revelations. Former IT specialist, left under unclear circumstances, account deactivated, but somehow reactivated remotely. Liam pulled up what information was available, finding only surface details. Employment dates, basic credentials. Nothing about why he'd left or what unclear circumstances meant. 2 o'clock approached with inexorable certainty, minutes evaporating, despite Liam's attempts to slow time through focused concentration on technical documentation. He closed the monitoring software, straightened his shirt, checked his reflection in the darkened computer screen. The face that stared back looked uncertain, younger than 32, unprepared for whatever conversation waited in Ariana Sterling's office. Her door stood open, an invitation that somehow felt more intimidating than if it had been closed. Liam approached slowly, footsteps measured, giving her time to notice his presence and either wave him in or postpone the meeting. She looked up from paperwork sprawled across her desk, something flickering across her expression, before smoothing into professional welcome. "Mr. Carter, come in. Close the door, please." The door's weight surprised him, solid and substantial and designed to seal out sound and casual interruption. Liam turned to face her, hands uncertain at his side's posture, awkward with the knowledge that last time he'd seen her, she'd been vulnerable in ways that still made his chest ache. Ariana stood, moving around the desk rather than remaining behind it, a gesture that felt deliberately chosen. She wore navy today, severe lines softened by expensive fabric, her hair pulled back to expose a face that looked tired despite careful makeup. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, evidence of sleep disturbed by yesterday's events and whatever private demons haunted her nights. "I wanted to speak with you privately before you start your official duties. What happened yesterday?" She paused, seeming to search for words that could adequately frame impossible circumstances. Liam waited, giving her space to find language for things that probably didn't have proper vocabulary. "I need you to understand something about me, about why I reacted the way I did. Why I froze instead of immediately explaining the situation or calling for help myself." Her hands moved restlessly, fingers intertwining and separating, a nervous tell that contrasted sharply with her controlled expression. 3 years ago, I was at an industry conference in Manhattan. There was an incident in a shared changing room, another speaker who decided my professional success meant I owed him something personal. He didn't succeed in doing everything he wanted, but he succeeded enough. The words landed like stones, each one carrying weight that accumulated in the space between them. Liam felt his throat tighten, anger rising hot and immediate, directed at a man he'd never met for actions he could only imagine. Since then, I've had what therapists call hypervigilance. Unexpected sounds, closed doors, being alone with men. I don't know, well, my body reacts before my brain can override it. Fight or flight, except I usually freeze, exactly like I did when you opened that door. She met his eyes, and Liam saw something raw in her gaze, vulnerability offered deliberately rather than accidentally. "So when you walked in, my reaction wasn't about you. It was about him, about that conference room, about every time since then, when a man's presence has triggered memories I'd rather forget. I'm telling you this because you deserve to understand. You didn't do anything wrong. You just happened to be there when 3 years of buried trauma decided to resurface." Liam's chest felt tight, emotions churning too fast to identify individually. Anger at the man who had hurt her, gratitude that she trusted him enough to share this determination, to somehow prove himself worthy of that trust, fear that he'd inadvertently caused more harm just by existing in proximity to her. "I'm sorry that happened to you. Nobody deserves that, regardless of their success or position or anything else. Thank you." The words were simple but carried undertones of relief, as if she'd expected judgment or skepticism rather than straightforward acceptance. She moved to the window, looking out at the city stretched below them, and when she spoke again, her voice was steadier. "Someone is targeting me, Mr. Carter. Yesterday's incident wasn't random or isolated. Someone with technical expertise and intimate knowledge of our systems is trying to recreate situations where I'm vulnerable, exposed, afraid. They sent you into that room deliberately at precisely the moment that would cause maximum distress." She turned back to face him, and now her expression carried steel beneath the vulnerability. "I need someone I can trust to monitor our security infrastructure, someone who isn't part of whatever conspiracy is operating within this building. Someone who has absolutely no reason to participate because they have everything to lose and nothing to gain. You want me to find them, whoever's doing this. I want you to watch for anomalies, patterns, anything that suggests continued sabotage or surveillance. I want you to be my eyes on systems that someone has already proven they can manipulate. Can you do that?" Liam thought about Mia, about the life he'd built from fragments, about the risk inherent in getting involved in wealthy people's problems that probably extended into territories he couldn't imagine. He thought about Ariana's trembling hands, closing her blouse, the fear in her eyes that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with wounds that hadn't healed. "Yes, I can do that." Something shifted in her expression, tension releasing fractionally as if his agreement had lifted weight she'd been carrying alone. Thank you. Eleanor has given you executive-level access to all building systems. That's more than standard for your position, but I need you to have complete visibility. If you see anything suspicious, anything at all, you report directly to me, not security, not management. Me. She moved closer, stopping just outside his personal space close enough that he could see faint scars near her hairline, in evidence of some past injury. And Mr. Carter, if you ever need to bring your daughter to work, do it. I meant what I said yesterday. She's welcome here. I won't let this job interfere with your responsibilities as a father. The unexpected consideration made Liam's throat tight. He nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady if he tried to speak. Ariana smiled, small and brief but genuine, then extended her hand in a gesture that echoed yesterday's moment in the security office. Welcome to the executive team, Mr. Carter. Try not to let anyone convince you that you don't belong here. His hand closed around hers, and for the second time in 2 days, Liam felt the strange desperation beneath her professional grip, the way her fingers held on a heartbeat longer than necessary, seeking something she couldn't ask for directly. The meeting ended with practical details about schedules and protocols and who to contact for various technical issues. Liam absorbed information mechanically, his mind still processing everything she told him, the trust she'd offered, the responsibility now resting on shoulders that felt suddenly inadequate to the task. He returned to his office in a daze, settling into the chair that would apparently now be his, surrounded by monitors that displayed Sterling Tower's digital circulatory system in real time. Somewhere in this sea of data patterns waited to be discovered evidence of whoever was hunting Ariana Sterling through elaborately orchestrated incidents designed to traumatize rather than physically harm. Liam pulled up the security logs again, this time looking not just at yesterday's events, but at weeks of historical data, searching for anomalies that might have been overlooked in random glitches or operator error. Hours passed while he dove into digital archaeology, excavating patterns from background noise. And they're buried in routine maintenance logs from 3 weeks ago. He found something. A brief access spike on the 51st floor cameras, lasting only 6 seconds, occurring at 7:47 p.m. on a Tuesday when the executive floor should have been empty. The timestamp was flagged as routine system verification, but something about it felt wrong too. Precisely timed, too conveniently explained. Liam cross-referenced it with other systems, building a timeline of that evening. Ariana had been in the building late, her keycard registering access to her office at 7:42 p.m. The camera spike occurred 5 minutes later, after she would have settled into work, possibly changing out of business attire into something more comfortable for long evening hours. Someone had been watching her, had been watching for weeks, maybe longer, learning her patterns, identifying moments of vulnerability, planning elaborate schemes that would exploit every wound she carried from past traumas. His hands curled into fists on the keyboard, anger hot and righteous burning through his chest. Whoever was doing this, whatever their motivation, they were calculating and patient and cruel in ways that suggested intelligence warped by malice. Finding them would require equal patience, careful observation, waiting for them to make mistakes that revealed their position. Liam saved his findings, encrypted the files, prepared a report that he'd deliver to Ariana tomorrow. Today had been overwhelming, enough information and emotion compressed into hours that felt like days. He needed time to process, to understand fully what he'd agreed to prepare mentally for battles that would be fought in digital spaces rather than physical confrontation. The afternoon bled into evening, the city beyond his window transforming as daylight surrendered to artificial illumination. Liam finally left the office at 6, riding the elevator down through floors he now had clearance to access, but would probably never visit, emerging into the lobby where ordinary employees streamed toward exits, toward lives that waited beyond Sterling Tower's gleaming walls. His phone buzzed as he reached his car, his mother's contact photo illuminating the screen. Mia's school event next week, reminder about costume day. Normal concerns from a normal life that existed parallel to the strange reality he'd entered when a door opened onto marble floors and vulnerable eyes. He drove through familiar streets that felt different, now transformed by knowledge he carried about wealthy women with trauma histories and unknown stalkers with technical sophistication. Everything looked the same, but meant something else, reality fractured into surfaces and depths, visible and hidden layers occupying the same space. Home welcomed him with its comfortable shabbiness, Mia's enthusiastic greeting, his mother's pot roast that filled the apartment with sense of normalcy and family. They ate together 3 generations around a table that had witnessed 1,000 similar meals, talking about ordinary things that mattered more than billion-dollar empires and corporate intrigue. But later, after Mia had been tucked into bed and his mother had gone home, Liam sat in the quiet living room with his laptop pulling up everything he could find about David Reeves. Employment history at Sterling Tower, credentials that suggested advanced technical skills, departure date 18 months ago, under circumstances that remain frustratingly vague in public records. Social media accounts had been deleted or locked, digital footprints scrubbed with thoroughness that suggested deliberate effort to disappear from casual observation. No obvious red flags, no manifestos or angry posts, nothing that screamed dangerous obsessive. Just absence negative space where a person should be erasure that felt more ominous than evidence would have been. Liam created files organizing information into categories that might reveal patterns with enough data points. He was building something here, a map of invisible territories where stalkers operated and victims struggled to identify threats before they materialized into action. Tomorrow he'd dig deeper, use his new access to building systems to trace movements and access patterns to find the ghost in Sterling Tower's machine. But tonight, in the quiet hours when sleep remained elusive despite exhaustion, he thought about Ariana's hands trembling as they closed her blouse, about the fear that lived behind her professional mask, about the strength required to keep functioning when past trauma insisted on infiltrating present moments. 3 years she'd carried that weight. 3 years of hypervigilance in therapy and rebuilding herself into someone who could stand in boardrooms without flinching when doors opened unexpectedly. And now someone was deliberately trying to tear down that reconstruction to reduce her back to a victim, frozen in spaces where predators operated without consequence. Liam's jaw tightened, determination solidifying in his chest. He'd been used yesterday, turned into a weapon aimed at someone who'd already survived too much. Now he could choose to be something else, a shield, a guardian, someone who stood between vulnerability and those who sought to exploit it. Not because she'd hired him, though that was true. Not because the job paid better, though that mattered for Mia's sake. Because in that moment, when their eyes had met across marble floors, he'd seen something in her that recognized something in him. Survivors, both of them trying to build lives from ruins left by circumstances beyond their control. Different traumas, different wounds, but the same stubborn insistence on continuing, despite everything that suggested surrender would be easier. The night deepened outside his windows, the city settling into its nocturnal rhythm of reduced activity, punctuated by sirens and distant sounds that never quite stopped. Liam finally closed his laptop, surrendering to exhaustion that made coherent thought impossible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, fresh mysteries to unravel, continued proximity to a woman whose vulnerability made him want to promise protection he wasn't sure he could provide. But tonight he'd done what he could. Signed paperwork that bound him to her cause, accepted responsibility that extended beyond technical systems into murky territories of human malice and wounded hearts. Started down a path that would lead somewhere he couldn't yet envision, but that felt inevitable, necessary, right? In ways that defied rational explanation. In her bedroom, Mia slept peacefully, dreams untroubled by adult complications, innocent of the conspiracies her father had stumbled into. Watching her from the doorway, Liam felt the familiar ache of loving someone completely, while knowing that love couldn't protect them from everything the world might inflict. But it could protect them from some things. Financial instability, for instance, worries about whether he could afford unexpected expenses or school trips or the medical care that seemed increasingly expensive. This new position, this salary increase, this opportunity that had emerged from disaster, it meant security for Mia, options he couldn't have provided before. That alone justified accepting Ariana's offer, regardless of the additional complications it introduced into his life. He was a father first, an employee, second, a man investigating dangerous stalkers, a distant third. Priorities remained clear even when circumstances grew murky. Sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams of surveillance cameras and shadowy figures and doors that opened onto spaces where past and present collapsed into single moments of terror. He woke several times, heart-racing, sheets twisted from restless movement, his subconscious processing everything his conscious mind had tried to organize into manageable categories. Morning arrived with cruel punctuality alarm, cutting through half-formed dreams with digital insistence. Liam dragged himself from bed, body protesting the abbreviated rest, and began the routine that would carry him through to evening. Shower, coffee, waking, Mia breakfast, the drive to school, the inevitable arrival at Sterling Tower, where his new responsibilities waited with patient inevitability. Today would bring different challenges. Today he'd begin actively searching for patterns in digital noise, looking for whoever was orchestrating Ariana's ongoing victimization. Today he'd become something more than a maintenance worker who'd accidentally witnessed vulnerability. He'd become an active participant in her defense, however inadequate his skills might prove against enemies he couldn't yet identify. The elevator carried him to the 51st floor, and as the doors opened onto polished marble and expensive art, Liam felt something shift in his chest. Determination maybe, or purpose. The sense that walking through a door 24 hours ago had been less accident than destiny, less coincidence than inevitable collision of trajectories that had been converging long before either of them knew to look for intersection. He was ready for whatever came next, whatever challenges emerged from shadows where stalkers plotted and survivors fought to reclaim autonomy over their own narratives. Ready to prove that trust had been placed wisely, that he could be more than his circumstances suggested, that ordinary men could stand between evil and its intended victims, with nothing more than determination and stubborn refusal to look away. The monitor on his desk glowed to life at his touch, security feeds populating screens in geometric precision. Somewhere in this digital landscape, evidence waited to be discovered, patterns that would reveal the identity of whoever was tormenting Ariana Sterling with such calculated cruelty. Liam leaned forward, fingers hovering over the keyboard, and began to search. The first week passed in a blur of system diagnostics and encrypted files. Liam inhabited his new office like a ghost, learning the dimensions of its haunting grounds, mapping digital territories with the methodical focus of someone who understood that missing details could mean the difference between safety and catastrophe. Every morning he arrived before dawn, watching Sterling Tower wake floor by floor through security feeds that transformed architecture into living organism pulsing with human activity that followed predictable rhythms. Except when it didn't. 3 days in, he found another anomaly buried in network traffic logs from 6 weeks prior. Someone had accessed personnel files at 2 in the morning using administrator credentials that technically belonged to a systems manager who'd been on vacation in Colorado at the time. The intrusion lasted 11 minutes, targeted specifically at employee records for the executive floors, then vanished without triggering any of the automated security alerts that should have screamed bloody murder. Liam documented everything in reports that grew longer each day, building a case file that painted disturbing pictures of patient surveillance and technical sophistication. Whoever was doing this understood Sterling Tower's infrastructure better than people who designed it, exploiting vulnerabilities with surgical precision that suggested insider knowledge combined with ongoing access to systems that should have been locked tight. He'd sent the first report to Ariana on day 2, encrypted and marked urgent. Her response came back within an hour, terse acknowledgement that offered no additional context or direction. Just continue monitoring, report anything else immediately. The brevity felt deliberate, professional distance maintained despite the intimacy of what they were investigating together. They'd seen each other 3 times that week, always in passing, always surrounded by other employees who made genuine conversation impossible. She'd nod in acknowledgement, he'd return the gesture, and they'd continue in opposite directions like strangers who happened to occupy the same building. The performance exhausted him, this pretense of normal professional hierarchy, when they both knew he was hunting predators through her company's digital bloodstream. Friday afternoon, his mother called, voice tight with apology and guilt in equal measure. Doctor's appointment had been rescheduled, without notice, wouldn't be done until 5 at the earliest. No way she could pick up Mia from school at 3 like usual. The babysitter was visiting family upstate. Options had evaporated, leaving only the solution Ariana had offered, but Liam had hoped not to use so soon. He stood in his office staring at the phone long after his mother hung up, weighing pride against practicality, dignity against necessity. Finally, he called Eleanor, explaining the situation with more apologies than the circumstances probably warranted. Her response came without hesitation or judgment, just, bring her. I'll make sure security has her name on the approved visitors list. So at 3:15, Liam found himself in the elementary school parking lot watching Mia emerge from the building with her backpack bouncing against small shoulders and her smile bright enough to shame the afternoon sun. She spotted his car and ran all 7-year-old velocity and zero concern for traffic patterns, her joy at unexpected pickup, making his chest tight with love that sometimes felt too large for his ribcage to contain. "Daddy, you never pick me up on Fridays. Is Grandma sick?" He buckled her into the booster seat, smoothing hair that had escaped her morning ponytail. "Grandma's fine. Just had a schedule change. We're going to my office for a little bit. Remember I told you about my new job?" Her eyes went wide, excitement displacing concern in the instant way children pivoted between emotions. "The big building. The one with 51 floors. That's the one. You'll have to be very good, very quiet. These are important people doing important work." "I'll be quiet as a mouse, quieter than a mouse sleeping." The drive back to Sterling Tower happened too fast, Mia chattering about her day while Liam's mind raced ahead to potential complications. What if Ariana was in a meeting? What if other executives saw him bringing his daughter to work like some kind of unprofessional disaster? What if Mia said something embarrassing or broke something expensive or, "Daddy, you're making your worried face." He glanced in the rearview mirror, meeting her green eyes that saw too much. "Just thinking about work stuff. Nothing important." "You think lots of things are important that really aren't. Grandma says you worry too much." Wisdom from a 7-year-old delivered with absolute confidence. Liam smiled despite his anxiety parallel parking with more care than usual, hyper-aware of Mia's presence making every decision carry additional weight. They entered the building hand in hand, her backpack slung over his shoulder, her curiosity painting everything in wonder. The lobby impressed her speechless, a rare state that lasted almost 30 seconds before questions erupted like fireworks. Why was the ceiling so high? What were all those people doing? Could she press the elevator button? The security guard at the desk watched them with amusement, softening professional vigilance, nodding at Liam with something approaching respect rather than the usual dismissive neutrality. The elevator felt smaller with Mia inside her presence, making the space simultaneously more cramped and infinitely larger. She counted floors aloud as numbers climbed, pressed her nose against the glass wall to watch the lobby recede below them, delighted by physics and architecture in ways that made ordinary things magical again. 48, 49, 50, 51. The doors opened and Mia fell silent, sensing without being told that this territory required different behavior than the lobby. The hallway stretched before them, polished and professional and intimidating in its restrained elegance. Liam felt her hand tighten in his small fingers, seeking reassurance from someone who felt only marginally more confident than she did. They made it halfway to his office before Ariana appeared around a corner, arms full of folders, attention focused on something Eleanor was explaining beside her. She looked exhausted, shadows under her eyes darker than they'd been on Monday, her movements carrying tension that spoke of sleep-deprived and stress accumulated. Then she saw Mia, and something fundamental shifted in her expression. The professional mag cracked, revealing underneath someone younger, softer, caught off guard by 7-year-old curiosity studying her with unfiltered interest. Ariana stopped walking, Eleanor continuing 2 steps before realizing her audience had been distracted. Mia stared with the unself-conscious directness children employed before society taught them to look away. "You have very pretty hair. Is it real? Or do you use extensions?" "Emma's mom uses extensions, but Daddy says it's not polite to ask about that." Liam's face went hot with mortification. "Mia, remember what we talked about?" But Ariana laughed actual laughter that transformed her face, completely erasing years of carefully constructed armor. She knelt down to Mia's eye-level folders, balanced precariously in her arms, meeting curious green eyes with something approaching delight. "It's real. No extensions. And your father is right, but I don't mind when people ask honest questions." Mia considered this seriously, head-tilting in a gesture Sarah used to make when evaluating complex problems. "Daddy says I ask too many honest questions. He says sometimes people want politeness instead of truth." "Your daddy sounds very wise." "He is, except when he tries to cook vegetables. Then he's not wise at all." Eleanor made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Ariana's smile widened genuine warmth, replacing the careful politeness she usually wore like protective equipment. She stood slowly, folders shifting, and her gaze found Liam's face with something in it that made his breath catch. You must be Mia. Your father mentioned you might visit sometime. He's worried I'll be bad and break something expensive. Mia's voice carried absolute conviction in her assessment. But I won't. I'm very careful with things that don't belong to me. I'm sure you are. Ariana straightened, addressing Eleanor without breaking eye contact with Liam. Cancel my 4 o'clock. Reschedule the budget review for Monday morning. Miss Sterling, the CFO, specifically requested. Monday. This is more important. She handed the folders to Eleanor, who accepted them with barely concealed surprise, then turned her full attention to Mia with focus that had suggested boardroom negotiations rather than conversation with a child. Would you like to see something special? There's a conference room down this hall with a whiteboard that covers an entire wall. Some people use it for boring business presentations, but I think it would be much better suited for drawing. Mia's face lit up with joy, so pure it was almost painful to witness. A whole wall for drawing. The whole thing, and there are markers in every color you can imagine. What do you think? Should we go look? Liam watched his daughter take Ariana Sterling's offered hand with zero hesitation, the casual trust children granted to adults who treated them as people rather than small inconveniences. They walked together down the hallway, Mia chattering about her castle drawings and dragon theories. Ariana listening with attention that appeared completely genuine rather than performative patience. Eleanor stood beside Liam holding forgotten folders, her expression somewhere between bewilderment and calculation. In 6 years as her assistant, I've never seen her cancel a meeting for anything short of medical emergency or board crisis. She's just being kind, probably feels guilty about Monday. Miss Sterling doesn't do guilt. She does strategy, efficiency, and occasionally ruthless pragmatism. This is something else entirely. They followed at a distance, watching Ariana unlock Conference Room B with a key card that granted access to spaces where million-dollar decisions happen daily. Inside, the promised whiteboard dominated one wall, pristine white surface, begging for color and imagination. Mia stood before it like a painter before fresh canvas, awe rendering her momentarily speechless. Ariana opened cabinets, producing markers in quantities that suggested someone had bulk ordered supplies for an elementary school. Any color you want, and when you're done, if you'd like, you could show me what you made. You really want to see? I really do. I don't get to see enough beautiful things in this office. Too much spreadsheets, not enough art. Mia selected markers with careful deliberation, arranging them by color family, already planning compositions in her mind. Ariana watched with something soft in her expression, vulnerability bleeding through professional composure. Then she turned to Liam, gesturing toward the door with subtle head movement that suggested conversation needed to happen elsewhere. They stepped into the hallway door, left open so Mia remained visible, industriously creating towers and turrets with concentration that excluded external world. Silence stretched between them, comfortable somehow, despite circumstances that should have made everything awkward. Thank you for being kind to her. She's easy to be kind to. Reminds me of... Ariana trailed off, something crossing her face too fast to identify. Reminds me of what joy looks like before the world teaches us to be careful with it. Liam wanted to ask what she'd almost said, whose memory Mia evoked, but Eleanor appeared with tablet and urgent expression that suggested crises couldn't be postponed indefinitely. Ariana sighed, tiredness bleeding through her posture, then nodded. I need to handle something. Stay with her. Make sure she has everything she needs. Of course, that's why I'm here. No, Ariana's eyes found as something fierce beneath the exhaustion. You're here because you're good at your job and I trust you. Your daughter being but here is just a reminder that some things matter more than quarterly reports and market share. She left before he could respond, Eleanor beside her discussing problems that probably cost more money than Liam would earn in a lifetime. He returned to the conference room, settling into a chair near the window, watching Mia create worlds from colored ink and imagination. An hour passed in peaceful silence, the kind of comfortable quiet that existed between people who didn't need constant conversation to fill space. Ariana returned near 6, hesitating in the doorway, like someone unsure of their welcome. Mia spotted her immediately, face brightening with the enthusiasm reserved for favorite teachers and beloved relatives. Come see, I made a castle with a secret garden and a tower for the princess and a stable for unicorns because every castle needs unicorns. Ariana approached the whiteboard with appropriate reverence, studying Mia's creation with focus that suggested genuine evaluation rather than condescending praise. This is remarkable. The proportions are excellent, and I especially like the detail in the garden. Are those roses? Roses and lavender and jasmine. Grandma has jasmine in her garden. It smells like sunshine. That's a perfect description. Jasmine does smell like sunshine. They stood together before the drawing, woman and child, united in appreciation of fantasy architecture, and something in Liam's chest cracked open. This was what Mia needed, what he couldn't provide: a lone female presence, gentle attention, someone who saw her as a whole person rather than a responsibility. Sarah's absence created holes in their daughter's life that he tried desperately to fill, but couldn't, not completely. Watching Ariana kneel beside Mia, listening to elaborate explanations of unicorn housing requirements, Liam felt something shift in his understanding of the woman he'd accidentally witnessed in vulnerability. She wasn't just wounded CEO or stalking victim or employer offering unexpected opportunities. She was someone with capacity for tenderness. She kept carefully hidden, protecting it behind professional distance because vulnerability had been weaponized against her too many times. They left near 7, Mia clutching a folder containing photographs Eleanor had printed of her whiteboard masterpiece. She chattered the entire drive home about pretty hair ladies and giant drawing walls, and how maybe when she grew up, she'd work in a tall building too. Liam listened, making appropriate responses, his mind stuck on the way Ariana had smiled at his daughter's joy, genuine pleasure, breaking through carefully maintained barriers. That night, after Mia finally fell asleep, still talking about castles and unicorns, Liam's phone lit with a message from an unknown number. Just 4 words, but they made his breath catch. Thank you for today. He stared at the screen, composing and deleting responses, finally settling on simplicity. She had a wonderful time. 3 dots appeared, wavered, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, so did I. Monday brought autumn storm systems that weathermen had tracked across the continent for days, promising biblical rain and theatrical lightning. Liam watched dark clouds gather through his office window, remembering childhood fears of thunder and his mother's reassurances that storms were just nature being dramatic. Nothing that could actually hurt him if he stayed inside safe buildings with proper lightning protection. He worked through lunch, tracing network activity patterns that suggested someone was probing building systems regularly, testing defenses like a burglar, trying door handles in wealthy neighborhoods. The attempts were sophisticated enough to avoid triggering alarms, but consistent enough to establish patterns for anyone patient enough to connect data points scattered across weeks of logs. 3 o'clock brought the first raindrops, heavy and insistent drumming against windows with increasing urgency. By 4, the sky had transformed into premature twilight darkness interrupted by lightning that painted everything in violent brilliance. Thunder followed seconds later, rolling across the city like artillery fire, making windows rattle in their expensive frames. Liam pulled up building status monitors, checking backup systems and emergency protocols. Professional thoroughness mixed with the same childhood unease that insisted storms were dangerous despite adult understanding of probability and architecture. Everything showed green, redundant systems ready to engage if primary power failed, generators tested weekly and certified monthly. The lights flickered, once, twice, a third time, with gap growing longer between recovery and darkness. Liam's hand moved toward his phone, instinctively checking the time. 4:47 p.m., exactly when evening meetings would be starting on executive floors, when people would be settling into conference rooms for discussions that couldn't be postponed. Then everything went black. Not gradual dimming, but instant totality, as if someone had flipped a switch that controlled the entire building's electrical system simultaneously. Emergency lighting should have engaged within seconds, battery-powered systems designed precisely for this scenario. Liam counted seconds in the darkness, waiting for the red glow of backup systems, but nothing happened. Complete electrical failure. Redundant systems offline. Every safety protocol they'd built and tested, all of it failing simultaneously in ways that weren't possible unless someone had deliberately sabotaged multiple independent systems. His phone flashlight cut through darkness, inadequate, but better than nothing. Liam moved toward the door, opening it onto a hallway that looked like something from nightmares. Familiar architecture transformed into alien landscape by absolute darkness. In the distance, he heard voices, confusion and rising panic from people who'd never experienced power failure in a building designed to prevent exactly this situation. Something made him turn toward the executive wing instinct or divine intervention, or simply the knowledge that Ariana had scheduled back-to-back meetings all afternoon. He moved quickly, phone light bouncing off walls and catching edges of expensive art, his boots loud against marble that seemed to amplify every sound. Conference Room B. He remembered her mentioning a late afternoon session with department heads, something about quarterly performance reviews. The door's electronic lock had engaged when power failed security protocol that trapped anyone inside, rather than risking unauthorized exit. Through the heavy wood, he heard breathing fast and shallow, the distinctive sound of someone fighting panic with increasingly poor success. "Miss Sterling, it's Liam. Can you hear me?" No response except that labored breathing, getting faster, spiraling toward hyperventilation. His chest tightened with understanding that crashed over him like cold water. Darkness, enclosed space, trapped without control. Every trigger her trauma had installed, all of them firing simultaneously. He found the manual override panel, prying it open with fingernails and desperate strength, pulling the emergency release lever that was supposed to disengage magnetic locks. The mechanism resisted, corroded or damaged, or deliberately sabotaged, requiring force that made his muscles scream. Finally, something gave lock, disengaging with metallic protest door swinging inward into darkness deeper than the hallway. His flashlight found her in the corner, pressed against the wall, like she was trying to merge with it, knees drawn to chest, eyes squeezed shut, entire body trembling with terror that had nothing to do with present reality and everything to do with past traumas resurrecting in the dark. She was making small sounds, not quite words, distress vocalized in ways that bypassed language entirely. Liam crossed the space, slowly announcing his approach with deliberate footsteps and calm voice that contradicted the adrenaline hammering through his system. "Ariana, it's Liam. You're safe. You're in Sterling Tower Conference Room B. The power's out, but that's all. Just a blackout. Nothing else." Her eyes opened, but they weren't seeing him, weren't seeing the conference room or present moment. They were seeing something else entirely, some other darkness, where different dangers had materialized into action rather than remaining safely abstract. Her breath came in gasps that couldn't possibly be delivering adequate oxygen. Panic attack in full progression. He knelt in front of her, setting the phone down so its light angled upward and illuminating both their faces without blinding either. Slowly giving her infinite time to pull away, he placed his hands on her shoulders, pressure firm enough to be grounding, but gentle enough to not feel like restraint. "Look at me. Just look at me. You're in Sterling Tower, 51st floor. The power went out, but you're safe. I'm here. Nobody's going to hurt you." Her eyes found his face, recognition flickering beneath terror. Her hands came up, gripping his forearms with desperate strength, nails digging through his shirt hard enough to hurt. But she was breathing slightly slower, panic plateauing rather than continuing its upward spiral toward complete dissociation. "That's it, in and out. Just breathe. I've got you." They stayed like that in the darkness, his hands on her shoulders, her grip on his arms, leaving marks that would bruise by morning, both of them breathing in synchronization that gradually slowed from panicked to merely distressed. Thunder rolled outside, closer now, lightning illuminating the room in violent flashes that made shadows jump and multiply. Ariana's voice emerged thin and broken, barely recognizable as belonging to the woman who commanded boardrooms. I can't do this. Make it stop." "It will stop. Storms always stop. Power always comes back on. This is temporary, all of it. Just temporary." Her head dropped forward, forehead coming to rest against his collarbone, her breath hot against his throat. He didn't move, barely breathed, terrified that any shift might shatter this fragile equilibrium. Her trembling continued, but softened terror giving ground to exhaustion, adrenaline burning through her system and leaving behind only emptiness. "He locked me in a room after the conference speech, said we needed to discuss partnership opportunities. Locked the door, turned off the lights, said darkness would help me focus on what he was saying." Liam's jaw clenched hard enough to make teeth ache. His arms shifted without conscious decision, moving from her shoulders to wrap around her, completely pulling her against his chest in an embrace that promised protection from ghosts he couldn't fight. She didn't pull away, didn't stiffen, just curved into him like someone seeking shelter from storms that had lasted too long. He didn't. Not everything he wanted, but enough. Enough that every time I'm in the dark, trapped in spaces I can't escape, I'm back in that room with his hands on me and his voice explaining why I owed him access to my body, because he'd helped my career. You didn't owe him anything. Success isn't payment. Advancement isn't currency for sexual access. Nothing about that was your fault or your debt. She was crying now, silent tears soaking through his shirt, her whole body shaking with sobs she'd probably held for 3 years, releasing them only now in darkness that hid her face from judgment. Liam held her tighter, one hand moving to her hair, fingers threading through silk that was softer than anything had right to be murmuring. Reassurances that probably meant nothing but were all he had to offer. Outside, the storm raged with nature's indifference to human drama. Lightning transformed the room into photographs, frozen moments of unlikely intimacy between maintenance worker and billionaire, between survivor and witness, between two people who'd collided through sabotage circumstances and discovered unexpected connection in the wreckage. Gradually, Ariana's breathing, even tears slowing to occasional tremors that shook her frame. She didn't pull away, though, staying pressed against him like she was memorizing the shape of safety, cataloging the sensation of being held without threat or expectation. Her voice emerged rough and exhausted. "I'm not afraid of you. I just realized. First man in years I've been alone with in darkness, and I'm not afraid." The admission landed between them with weight that had nothing to do with words and everything to do with what they meant. Liam's arms tightened fractionally, acknowledgement without speech, understanding that some truths were too fragile for discussion. The power returned 40 minutes later, lights flooding the conference room with brightness that made them both flinch. Ariana pulled back immediately, distance reasserting itself, professional mask sliding into place with practiced speed, despite tear tracks still visible on her face. She stood on unsteady legs, smoothing her suit with hands that trembled only slightly, assembling armor with muscle memory that transcended conscious thought. Liam stood more slowly, giving her space and time to rebuild whatever walls she needed between them. He watched her transformation, saw the moment she decided who she would be when they left this room, when other people's eyes would evaluate and judge and draw conclusions about her strength. "This doesn't leave this room. What you saw, what I told you, it stays here." Not a question, not a request. A statement of terms she needed him to accept before they could move forward. Liam nodded, understanding that trust this deep came with the conditions, that vulnerability, this profound, required guarantees before it could be safely acknowledged. Nothing happened in here except a power outage and two people waiting for backup systems to engage. Something softened in her expression. Gratitude that she wouldn't voice, but he could read in the way her shoulders lowered fractionally. "Thank you for being here, for not—" She stopped, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. Didn't need to. He understood what she wasn't saying, all the things other men might have done with a powerful woman, rendered helpless in darkness, all the ways vulnerability could be exploited by those who saw weakness as opportunity. They left the conference room separately, maintaining professional distance that probably fooled nobody, but served necessary purposes anyway. Liam returned to his office, checking systems that had mysteriously failed, and just as mysteriously recovered, finding evidence of tampering that would take days to fully document. Someone had done this deliberately, created this situation, targeted Ariana with surgical precision that demonstrated intimate knowledge of her psychological wounds. That night, he couldn't sleep. Memories of her trembling in his arms, mixing with rage at whoever was orchestrating these elaborate cruelties. He lay in darkness, listening to rain that had continued past the storm's main assault, steady drumming that sounded like time passing, opportunities slipping away, dangers gathering strength for next attacks. The photograph arrived 3 weeks later, sliding into reality with malicious timing that spoke of patient planning. Liam was running security audits when his phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor, terse and urgent board meeting. "Now, you need to be there." He arrived to find conference room A transformed into tribunal, board members arrayed around the table like judges preparing to deliver verdicts. Harrison Wells held position at the table's head, silver hair, an expensive suit projecting authority that came from old money and older connections. His expression carried theatrical concern as he held up an 8x10 photograph image, clear enough to see from across the room. Liam felt his stomach drop, recognizing the scene captured from impossible angles. The blackout. Conference room B. His arms around Ariana, her face pressed against his chest, her hands gripping his shirt with desperate strength. Someone had photographed them through the window long lens, capturing intimate moment and removing all context that would explain innocence. Ariana sat at the table's opposite end, her face carved from ice posture, rigid with control that suggested proximity to breaking points. She stared at the photograph like it was a snake that had materialized on polished wood, venomous and dangerous, and aimed directly at her carefully protected reputation. Wells's voice carried false sympathy that made Liam's hands curl into fists. I think we need to discuss this before proceeding with quarterly reviews. Miss Sterling, perhaps you'd like to explain the context. Where did you get this? It was delivered anonymously to several board members this morning. We felt it important to address directly rather than allowing speculation to undermine company leadership. Surely you understand our concern. A CEO in what appears to be a compromising position with a maintenance worker raises questions about judgment and propriety. Ariana's eyes found Liam's face across the room, something desperate in her gaze. He saw her calculating, weighing options that all carried consequences, deciding which version of truth to offer to men who'd already drawn conclusions. She could minimize, dismiss, sacrifice him to protect herself and the company. Would be reasonable, expected the smart, strategic choice. But watching her face, Liam saw the moment she chose differently. Saw her decide that truth mattered more than reputation, that his defense was worth whatever damage honesty would inflict on her carefully constructed image. She stood slowly, authority gathering around her like storm clouds, preparing to speak words that would change everything. I'll explain, but not to protect myself, to protect someone who doesn't deserve to be weaponized against me by whoever is orchestrating this harassment campaign. Wells's expression flickered surprise, bleeding through theatrical concern. Harassment campaign, Miss Sterling, this is simply addressing concerns about 3 years ago, I was sexually assaulted by a colleague at an industry conference. The trauma from that incident left me with hypervigilance and panic responses that therapy has helped manage, but not eliminate. Someone in this building knows about my condition and has been deliberately creating situations designed to trigger those responses. The room went silent, shock rippling through board members who'd expected different revelations. Ariana continued, voice steady despite tremors that Liam could see in her hands pressed flat against the table. The night this photograph was taken, someone sabotaged our backup power systems to create prolonged darkness, specifically when I was alone in a conference room. The electronic lock engaged, trapping me inside. I had a severe panic attack. Mr. Carter found me, got me out, and stayed with me until the episode passed. He did nothing inappropriate. He showed compassion to someone in crisis. She paused, meeting eyes around the table with defiance that dared them to judge. So, if this board decides to punish a man for being kind, when I was vulnerable, you'll have my resignation within the hour. But I want to know who took this photograph and who distributed it, because that person has been systematically stalking me for months, and I will prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. Silence stretched, broken only by rain against windows, storm system that had settled over the city with apparent permanence. Harrison Wells had gone pale, his theatrical concern crumbling into something that might have been genuine shock or calculated retreat. Other board members exchanged glances, discomfort radiating from postures that suddenly found the table surface fascinating. Ariana's sleeve caught on the table edge as she moved, pulling her blouse aside for just a moment, long enough for everyone to see the bruise shadowing her collarbone, purple and yellow evidence of impact that definitely wasn't 3 years old. Someone had hurt her recently, wounds accumulating faster than they could heal, danger that was present and ongoing rather than safely past. Board members saw it. Understanding rippled through the room like electricity, conclusions reforming around new data. This wasn't scandal or impropriety. This was a victim trying to survive coordinated psychological warfare while running a billion-dollar company and maintaining composure that would have broken lesser people weeks ago. Wells found his voice, though it lacked earlier confidence. Miss Sterling, if you're being threatened, we should involve law enforcement immediately. This is beyond corporate security protocols. I'm handling it. I have people I trust working on identifying whoever is responsible. When we have concrete evidence, then we'll involve external authorities. Until then, I expect this board to issue a formal apology to Mr. Carter for any damage this photograph has caused to his reputation. I'm also recommending him for immediate promotion to Head of Security Technology for the Executive Division. Any objections? No one objected. The meeting dissolved shortly after board members filing out with expressions that ranged from embarrassment to calculation to something that might have been respect. Liam remained near the door, uncertain whether he was dismissed or needed, watching Ariana gather papers with mechanical precision that suggested she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. Wells approached her before leaving, voice low, but not quiet enough to prevent Liam from hearing. That was either the bravest thing I've seen in 30 years of board meetings or the most foolish. Possibly both. I'm done being afraid of my own vulnerability. Done letting predators dictate my responses. If that's foolish, I'll be a fool. Wells left, shaking his head, and then it was just the two of them in the too large conference room. Silence heavy with everything that had just happened. Ariana finally looked at Liam, and something in her expression made his chest ache. I'm sorry. For dragging you into this, for making you part of whatever game someone is playing. You didn't ask for any of this. Neither did you. Difference is I can walk away. You're the target. Are you walking away? Liam crossed the room, stopping just outside her personal space, close enough to see exhaustion carved into her features. No, not until we find whoever's doing this and make sure they can't hurt you again. She nodded, something vulnerable breaking through professional facade. That photograph, what you saw that night, it wasn't weakness. I need you to understand that surviving isn't the same as being broken. I know. Survival takes more strength than people who've never needed it could possibly understand. They stood in the quiet conference room while rain painted patterns on windows, and somewhere in the building a predator planned next moves in a campaign of terror that was far from over. But for this moment in this space, they were just two people who'd found unexpected alliance in the wreckage of orchestrated disasters, building something that might be friendship, or trust, or the beginning of something neither could yet name. Outside, thunder rolled across distant sky storm systems, gathering strength for whatever came next. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning when autumn had surrendered completely to winter's advance. Liam sat surrounded by three monitors displaying cascading data, cross-referencing access logs against personnel records, building timelines that stretched back 18 months to when David Reeves had supposedly left Sterling Tower under those maddeningly vague, unclear circumstances. Except the more Liam dug, the less those circumstances remained unclear, and the more they pointed toward deliberate erasure. He'd found the original HR complaint buried in archived files that required executive override to access Ariana's credentials, opening doors that revealed ugly truths. Sexual harassment allegation filed by a junior marketing analyst detailed documentation of inappropriate comments and unwanted touching investigation that had lasted exactly 4 days before being quietly terminated. The analyst had resigned 3 days later with a severance package that included strict non-disclosure agreements. David Reeves had kept his job another 6 months before departing with glowing references and retirement package that seemed excessive for someone barely 35. The complaint had been filed by a woman named Jennifer Martinez, and when Liam traced her current employment, he found she'd left the industry entirely, now working as a librarian in Portland, with social media accounts locked tight and no digital footprint, suggesting she wanted to be found. But the investigation file contained one detail that made Liam's blood run cold. The complaint had been reviewed and dismissed by then board member Marcus Chen, who'd cited insufficient evidence despite witness statements and email documentation. Chen had been replaced on the board 2 years ago by Harrison Wells, longtime friend and business associate, whose background was so clean it looked professionally sanitized. Liam pulled up every interaction between Reeves and Wells in Sterling Tower's systems, finding exactly nothing which itself felt significant. No emails, no meeting room bookings, no elevator rides captured on the same camera feeds, no evidence of connection that IT specialists and board members would naturally have through normal company operations. The absence suggested deliberate avoidance of creating digital trails, the kind of careful behavior that came from knowing surveillance existed and planning around it. He was building a flowchart of connections when Eleanor appeared in his doorway, her usual composure fractured by something approaching alarm. Her voice came low and urgent, meant only for his ears despite the empty hallway. Miss Sterling just received a package, hand-delivered to her apartment last night, left outside her door. No signature, no cameras caught who left it. She's in her office now, and you should come. Liam followed her down the corridor, dread building with each step. Ariana's office door stood open, but the woman inside bore little resemblance to the composed CEO who'd faced down the board 3 weeks ago. She stood at her window with arms wrapped around herself, defensive posture that made her look smaller, younger, more vulnerable than he'd seen even during the blackout. The package sat on her desk, brown paper torn open to reveal a laptop that looked old enough to be obsolete. Its screen glowed with a video paused on a frame that Liam couldn't quite see from the doorway, but that had clearly devastated Ariana. Eleanor gestured him forward, then retreated, closing the door with a soft click that sealed them in privacy that suddenly felt inadequate. Ariana's voice emerged, hollow, scraped raw by emotions he couldn't identify. It's from that conference 3 years ago. Someone recorded what happened in that room. Liam's stomach dropped, nausea rising hot and immediate. He moved to the desk but kept his eyes on her face rather than the screen, refusing to watch something she'd suffered without her explicit permission. Have you played it? 30 seconds. That's all I could manage before I had to stop. Do you want me to watch it, see if there's anything that might identify who recorded it or why they're sending it now? She shook her head, mother desperate in the movement. I don't want anyone to watch it. I want it to not exist. I want that night to not exist. But since neither of those options are available, I need to know what it shows, what evidence it might contain, what leverage someone thinks they have by possessing it. Liam approached the laptop slowly, giving her time to object or refuse or demand he leave. When she didn't, he pressed play, then immediately wished he hadn't. The footage was grainy, shot from a high angle that suggested hidden camera placement, but the audio was sickeningly clear. A conference room door closing, lock, engaging lights dimming. A man's voice, smooth and reasonable, explaining that they needed privacy for sensitive business discussions. Then Ariana's voice, younger somehow, saying she had another meeting scheduled, needed to leave, should reschedule. The man's hand on her arm, pressure increasing when she tried to pull away. His voice maintaining that same horrible calm while explaining what he believed she owed him, what her success had cost him in terms of mentorship and support, what payment he now intended to collect. Liam stopped the video before it progressed further, his hands shaking with rage that demanded physical outlet against a man he couldn't reach. We're taking this to the police. This is evidence of assault, extortion, stalking. This is a dozen felonies committed by whoever sent this. It's also evidence of my assault. Once that video exists in police custody, it's subject to discovery, potentially admissible in court, vulnerable to leaks. My trauma becomes public record, my worst moment broadcast for legal proceedings and probably tabloid consumption. Do you understand what you're asking me to sacrifice? Her voice broke on the last word, and Liam saw tears tracking down her face that she didn't bother wiping away. He wanted to go to her to offer comfort in the only way he knew how, but something in her posture suggested that touch right now would shatter what remained of her composure. So he stayed by the desk, hands curled into fists at his sides, helpless in the face of cruelty that used her own victimization as weapon. There's a note under the laptop. Liam found it, plain printer paper with words assembled from cut magazine letters like something from a kidnapping movie. The message was brief and venomous. Everyone will see what you really are. How far you fell to climb so high. Your choice: resign quietly or become famous for all the wrong reasons. Understanding crashed over him with physical force. This wasn't just stalking or harassment. This was coordinated campaign to force Ariana from her position, to destroy her reputation thoroughly enough that resignation would seem like mercy. Someone wanted her gone badly enough to resurrect her worst trauma and weaponize it for public consumption. The board. Someone on the board is behind this. Ariana turned from the window, meeting his eyes with something fierce burning through her tears. Harrison Wells, it has to be. He's been pushing for leadership changes, suggesting I'm too young for this position, that the company needs more experienced direction. And he was Marcus Chen's closest friend, Chen, who dismissed the complaint against David Reeves despite overwhelming evidence. Liam pulled out his phone, opening the files he'd compiled that morning, showing her the connections he'd traced between Wells and Chen and the careful absence of any digital trail linking Wells to Reeves. What if Reeves didn't just know Wells? What if Wells helped him, protected him? And what if Wells was involved with your assault too, either directly or as an accomplice? The words hung in air that suddenly felt charged with electricity. Ariana crossed to her desk, studying the documentation with focus that pushed emotion aside in favor of analytical thinking. Her finger traced patterns Liam had mapped connections implied by absence rather than presence. The man who assaulted me. His name was Richard Donovan, CEO of a tech company that Sterling Holdings acquired 6 months later. The acquisition made him wealthy and gave Wells majority position on their combined board. They were college roommates, fraternity brothers. Fresh nausea twisted through Liam's gut as implications assembled themselves into horrifying clarity. This wasn't random violence or opportunistic assault. This had been planned, orchestrated, possibly even encouraged by men who saw powerful women as obstacles to be eliminated through any means necessary. And now they were trying again, using evidence of their previous crime as leverage to force her out. The office door opened without warning, Eleanor rushing in with phone extended and expression panicked. "Miss Sterling, building security just alerted me. David Reeves used an old access code to enter the parking garage. He's in the building. Now." Ariana's face went white, all color draining in an instant. Liam felt his protective instincts surge, adrenaline flooding his system with chemical command to fight rather than flee. He moved without thinking, positioning himself between Ariana and the door, creating barrier with his body that probably wouldn't stop determined attack, but felt necessary anyway. "Call the police, now, and get building security up here, every available guard." Eleanor was already moving, speaking urgently into her phone while retreating into the hallway. Liam heard her coordinating response, summoning help that would arrive in minutes that might as well be hours. He turned back to Ariana, saw her frozen in that familiar terror response, body locked in place, while her mind replayed every nightmare scenario. "Ariana, look at me." Her eyes found his face, but they were distant, seeing past him to threats that existed in memory and present danger simultaneously. He crossed the space between them, taking her shoulders like he had during the blackout, grounding touch that demanded presence in the moment. "I won't let him hurt you. Whatever happens next, he doesn't get to touch you. Do you understand?" The office door swung open with force that made it rebound off the wall. David Reeves stood in the opening, looking nothing like his employee photo from 18 months ago. He'd lost weight, gained haunted quality around his eyes, wore clothes that suggested he'd been sleeping rough, or at least living without access to laundry facilities. But his smile was what made Liam's blood freeze, expression of someone who'd moved beyond rational thought into territory where consequences no longer registered. "Ariana, it's been so long. Did you like my gifts, the photographs, the video, the careful recreation of your worst memories? I've been working so hard to help you remember what you really are." Liam stepped forward, putting himself directly between Reeves and Ariana, his voice steady despite pulse hammering loud enough that he could hear it in his ears. "You need to leave, right now. Security is already coming. Police are on their way. Whatever you think you're accomplishing here, it's over." Reeves' laugh sounded unhinged and bitter. "Over, it's just beginning. Harrison promised me everything: my job back, restoration of reputation, revenge against the woman who destroyed my career by being so tempting that I couldn't help wanting her. All I had to do was make her afraid, make her vulnerable, prove she's not strong enough to run this company." The admission hung in air like smoke, confession delivered with complete absence of awareness that he'd just incriminated himself in Wells. Liam heard footsteps in the hallway, multiple sets moving fast, but Reeves was still talking, still explaining his logic with the confidence of someone who believed his narrative despite evidence of its insanity. "You ruined me. One complaint, and suddenly I'm the villain, the predator forced out with money that barely covered a year of unemployment. While you stayed here getting richer, getting more powerful, getting everything I deserved." Ariana's voice emerged from behind Liam, stronger than he'd expected, cutting through Reeves's justifications with surgical precision. "I didn't file that complaint. Jennifer Martinez did. I barely knew you existed until your name appeared in investigation documents. You destroyed yourself by being someone who hurt people and expected no consequences." The words landed like physical blows, Reeves's expression cycling through confusion to rage to something that looked like grief. Then he moved, lunging forward with violence that had been building through months of obsessive planning. Liam reacted on instinct, shoving Ariana backward toward the desk, while intercepting Reeves's momentum with his shoulder, both of them crashing into expensive furniture that splintered under combined weight. Chaos erupted in fragmented impressions, Reeves's fist connecting with his ribs, his own elbow finding soft tissue, someone screaming, hands grabbing at both of them from multiple directions. Security guards swarmed the office, hauling Reeves away from Liam, with professional efficiency restraining him against the floor while reading rights in voices that suggested they'd done this before. Liam rolled to his knees, ribs screaming protests, scanning the office for Ariana. She stood pressed against the window, Eleanor beside her, both women watching the scene with expressions that mixed horror and relief. Their eyes met across the chaos, and something passed between them that had no words, only understanding that they'd survived something together that would mark them both. Police arrived within minutes, transforming Ariana's office into a crime scene that required statements, an evidence collection, and patient explanation of events that sounded insane when narrated chronologically. Liam told them everything: the stalking campaign, the staged incidents, Wells's involvement, the video evidence, and threatening note. Officers documented with professional thoroughness, photographing the laptop and packaging recording testimony that would become foundation for prosecution. Harrison Wells arrived an hour later, summoned by emergency calls to board members, his expression carefully neutral until he saw Reeves in restraints being led toward elevators by officers. Then something flickered across his face, calculation replaced by fear, understanding that conspiracy was unraveling faster than damage control could contain. Ariana watched him with predatory focus, and when she spoke, her voice carried steel that could cut diamond. Richard Donovan was your fraternity brother. David Reeves worked for a company you had financial interest in. The assault 3 years ago happened at a conference you organized. Would you like to explain those coincidences, Harrison? Or should I let the police detective currently reviewing evidence make those connections himself? Wells's face transformed through several shades of pale before settling on gray that suggested cardiac crisis. He opened his mouth closed. It opened it again like a fish drowning in air. I don't know what you're implying, but I had nothing to do with. You helped David get his job here. You dismissed Jennifer Martinez's complaint through your influence with Marcus Chen. You've been orchestrating a campaign to force my resignation by recreating my trauma systematically and methodically. And you're going to confess all of it, or I will spend every dollar of my considerable wealth ensuring you and Richard Donovan face consequences for what you did 3 years ago and what you've done since. The detective's attention sharpened, pen hovering over notebook with professional interest. Wells looked around the office like escape routes might materialize through architectural will-finding, only closed doors and recording devices, and witnesses whose testimony would destroy whatever remained of his reputation. When he finally spoke, his voice carried defeat that came from knowing the game had ended. I want my lawyer. I'm sure you do, Detective. I believe Mr. Wells just became person of interest in this investigation, possibly an accessory to multiple felonies, including stalking, assault, and conspiracy. I'll provide all relevant documentation to support formal charges. Wells was escorted from the office with considerably less force than Reeves had been, but the humiliation carved into his features suggested equal devastation. The board member who'd held power through connections and old money reduced to suspect in criminal proceedings that would dissect his entire life looking for evidence of conspiracy. The office emptied gradually, police collecting evidence and witnesses, Eleanor coordinating damage control that involved lawyers and PR specialists and carefully worded statements to media that would inevitably descend once word spread. Finally, only Liam and Ariana remained standing amid furniture, disorder, and emotional wreckage, survivors of battle that had been fought across months but culminated in single violent hour. Ariana moved toward him, slowly, her professional mask completely absent, now leaving behind only the woman who trembled in his arms during blackout darkness and confessed fears that lived deeper than conscious thought. Her hand reached out, fingers ghosting over the bruise already forming on his jaw from Reeves's fist. You protected me. You didn't have to. Could have stayed safe, let security handle it. But you put yourself between me and him without hesitation. Liam caught her hand, holding it against his face, the touch grounding them both in present moment. That night during the blackout, you said you weren't afraid of me. First man in years you'd been alone with in darkness, and you weren't afraid. That's the most profound gift anyone's ever given me, being the person who made you feel safe instead of threatened. Of course I protected you. How could I not? her eyes filled with tears that spilled over, tracking down cheeks that looked suddenly younger without professional composure smoothing her features. I spent 3 years building walls protecting myself from vulnerability, convinced that letting anyone see my wounds would mean destruction. And then you walk through a door at exactly the wrong moment, and somehow that became the beginning of learning how to trust again. Or exactly the right moment. Maybe doors don't open accidentally. Maybe some coincidences are just the universe correcting trajectory. She laughed through tears, sound watery but genuine. That's philosophy from a maintenance worker. Technical Infrastructure Specialist Executive Division. Get my title right. The laughter strengthened, breaking through tension that had accumulated over months of fear and isolation. Ariana stepped closer, eliminating distance between them, until they stood close enough that Liam could count individual eyelashes, see faint scars that makeup usually hid, notice everything that made her human rather than untouchable CEO. I need to tell you something about that first day when you opened the door. You don't have to explain. No, I do, because you've seen me at my most vulnerable repeatedly now, and you deserve to understand why. What shocked me wasn't that you saw me undressed. It was your eyes. The way you looked at me, there was no judgment, no hunger, no calculation about leverage, just pure concern for my well-being, despite not knowing me at all. In that moment, I saw someone who instinctively wanted to protect rather than exploit, and that recognition changed something fundamental. Her hand moved from his grip to his chest palm, flat over his heart that hammered against ribs still sore from fighting. Nobody's ever looked at me that way. Like I was both strong enough to save myself and deserving of help anyway. Like the broken parts didn't make me less, just made me who I am. Liam covered her hand with his, holding it against the physical proof of emotion he couldn't quite name. You're not broken. You're surviving, which is different. Survival takes more courage than people who've never needed it could understand. They stood like that while afternoon light painted the office gold, while the city continued its business beyond windows, while somewhere below, police processed criminals who'd thought power meant immunity. The moment stretched intimate without being sexual vulnerable, without requiring rescue. Two people learning that trust didn't demand perfection, only honesty. The office door opened, a Mia's voice cutting through contemplative silence with 7-year-old volume that knew no moderation. Daddy, Grandma said there was excitement in police and that you were a hero. She appeared around the doorframe, Liam's mother trailing behind with apologetic expression, both of them stopping short when they saw the destroyed furniture and Liam's bruised face and the way he and Ariana stood close enough to blur boundaries between professional and something else entirely. Mia's eyes went huge, filling with tears that preceded crying by maybe 3 seconds. Daddy, you're hurt. Who hurt you? Do you need a Band-Aid? I have princess Band-Aids in my backpack. Liam dropped to his knees, opening his arms to catch small body launching at him with force that made his ribs scream. He held his daughter close, breathing in strawberry shampoo and playground dust, grounding himself in this reality where he'd survived violence and could still provide comfort to someone who needed him. I'm okay, Bug. Just a little bruise. Nothing that Princess Band-Aids won't fix. Mia pulled back to study his face with intensity that would have been comedic if she weren't so serious. Then she turned to Ariana, who'd stepped back to give them space, but whose expression carried something soft and yearning. Did someone try to hurt you too? Is that why Daddy has bruises? Was he protecting you? Ariana knelt down to Mia's level, meeting green eyes that demanded honesty with directness that most adults couldn't maintain. Yes, someone tried to hurt me and your father made sure they couldn't. He was very brave. Daddy's always brave, even when he's scared. That's what bravery is, right? Being scared but doing the right thing anyway. That's exactly what bravery is. Your father is one of the bravest people I've ever met. Mia considered this seriously, then made a decision that showed in her posture straightening. She took Ariana's hand without asking permission, then grabbed Liam's with her other, linking them physically in chain that felt symbolically significant. When people are brave together, they should celebrate. Grandma says celebrating good things makes them more real. Liam's mother laughed from the doorway, understanding passing between adults over child's head. She's not wrong, and I think after the day you've both had, celebrating survival sounds exactly right. Ariana looked at Mia, then at Liam, something vulnerable in her expression that asked questions she couldn't voice with audience present. When she spoke, her voice carried hope that had been absent for weeks. There's a restaurant nearby, an Italian place with very good pasta and chocolate cake that I've been told is legendary. If you're not too tired, well, if you could join me. My treat. Call it gratitude for bravery under fire. Mia bounced with excitement that made her grip on both their hands tighten. Can we, Daddy? Please, I promise I'll use my best manners and not spill anything and eat all my vegetables, even though Italian vegetables are probably weird. Liam met Ariana's eyes across his daughter's head, seeing invitation that extended beyond dinner, beyond gratitude into territory that both terrified and compelled him. Class differences still existed, salary gaps that measured in orders of magnitude complications inherent in workplace relationships. But underneath all that practical concern, he saw something else, a woman who'd learned to trust him through shared trauma, who'd shown him vulnerability that she protected from everyone else, who looked at his daughter with yearning, that suggested she saw what could be rather than what was. Yeah, Bug, we can go. Let me just clean up a bit first. The restaurant materialized exactly as promised, intimate Italian place tucked into a side street that probably required reservations weeks in advance. But Ariana walked in like royalty returning home, the owner greeting her by name and leading them to a corner table that offered privacy despite the crowd. Mia chattered about pasta shapes and whether unicorns would eat Italian food, her enthusiasm infectious enough to draw smiles from nearby diners. They ordered family-style sharing dishes that arrived in generous portions, warm bread and olive oil, and vegetables that Mia tried with suspicious bravery. Liam watched his daughter charm Ariana with stories about her castle drawings and the boy at school who thought dragons were scientifically impossible. Watch this powerful woman listen with genuine interest that transformed her face from CEO to someone who genuinely enjoyed seven-year-old logic. His mother had gracefully declined the invitation, citing previous dinner plans that probably didn't exist, but that created space for this accidental family dinner to feel less crowded. Liam appreciated her intuition, the way she understood that sometimes three people needed to figure out what they might become without additional witnesses. Dessert arrived, the promised chocolate cake living up to its legendary status, rich enough to make Mia's eyes roll back with pleasure. She ate with focus that precluded conversation, completely absorbed in culinary experience. Ariana watched her with expression that Liam finally recognized: maternal yearning, the look of someone who'd wanted children, but sacrificed that dream to ambition or circumstances or trauma that made intimacy feel too dangerous. Do you have kids? I don't mean to be rude asking, but you look at Mia the way Daddy looks at pictures of my mom. Ariana's smile carried sadness that aged her despite expensive skincare. No children. I always thought I'd have time later after I'd established my career. Then later kept getting pushed further away until suddenly I'm 35 and realizing that someday might never come. You're not too old. Daddy says you're never too old to start over if you find the right reasons. He started over after Mom died, and now we have a good life, even though it's different than before. The wisdom of children delivered without artifice or agenda, just observations presented as factual truth. Liam watched emotions flicker across Ariana's face, too fast to catalog, settling finally on something that looked like hope wrestling with fear. Your daughter is remarkable. You've done an incredible job raising her. She makes it easy, reminds me constantly what actually matters when everything else feels overwhelming. They left the restaurant near 8, Mia holding both their hands again, like she had in the office, creating human chain that suggested connection deeper than circumstantial. The evening had cooled considerably, autumn surrendering to winter's invasion, the kind of temperature that made breath visible and necessitated jackets. Liam felt ribs protest, movement bruises, solidifying into permanent reminders of violence survived. Ariana's car waited nearby, black sedan driven by a professional who emerged to open doors with practiced efficiency. She hesitated before entering, turning back to face them with expression that combined determination and vulnerability in equal measure. Tomorrow, I need to return to that room, 51A, where this all started. I need to stand in that space with the door open and prove to myself that it doesn't own me anymore. Understanding crashed over Liam with force that made his chest tight. She was choosing to face her fear deliberately, to reclaim space that had been weaponized against her, to transform sight of trauma into something neutral through sheer force of will. Do you want company? I'd like that, if you're willing. 10 o'clock. I'll be there. She climbed into the car window, lowering as the engine purred to life. Thank you, for today, for dinner, for everything you've done. I know it's more than any job description could reasonably demand. It stopped being about the job weeks ago. This is about making sure you can stand in any room without fear. About proving that surviving means winning, not just enduring. The car pulled away, taillights disappearing into traffic while Mia tugged at his hand with insistent strength. Daddy, do you like her? Like her, because I think she likes you. Emma's sister says that's different than regular liking. Liam laughed, scooping his daughter into his arms despite protesting ribs walking toward their car, while his heart did complicated things in his chest. It's complicated, Bug. Adult relationships usually are. It doesn't seem complicated. She makes you smile the way you used to smile in old pictures with Mom. That seems pretty simple to me. The next morning arrived with winter clarity, cold air, and sharp light that made everything look slightly surreal. Liam stood outside room 51A at exactly 10, waiting for Ariana to arrive, remembering the last time he'd stood here with work order in hand and absolutely no idea that opening this door would reshape his entire existence. She appeared from the elevator dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, rather than her usual armor of expensive suits, looking younger and more vulnerable without professional costume. They stood together outside the closed door, neither speaking, both understanding that what came next mattered in ways beyond rational explanation. When you opened this door the first time, I saw a monster. Not you, someone else, someone from my nightmares wearing a stranger's face. My mind couldn't separate past from present, danger from innocence. Every man became the same threat. Her hand moved toward the door handle, hovering without touching. But then you just stood there, frozen and horrified, and something in me recognized that your fear matched mine. That you weren't predator, but witnessed that you'd stumbled into my trauma accidentally and were just as terrified of having done harm as I was of being harmed. Liam remained silent, letting her process aloud, understanding that she needed to narrate this before she could move forward. Her fingers finally closed around the handle chrome that had featured in security footage and nightmares in the catalytic moment that had brought them here. I'm opening this door now, by choice, with full awareness, taking back control of this space that someone tried to make toxic. The door swung inward, revealing a room that looked exactly as it had 6 weeks ago. Marble floors, expensive furniture, windows overlooking the city. But standing here together with trauma acknowledged and faced rather than hidden, the space felt different, neutral. Just a room that had witnessed the beginning of something rather than the continuation of old wounds. Ariana stepped inside and Liam followed, closing the door behind them with soft click. She stood in the center where she'd been standing that first day, but now her posture carried strength rather than frozen terror. She turned in slow circle, cataloging details, reclaiming territory one breath at a time. I'm not afraid. Right now in this room with you here, I'm not afraid. The words echoed the confession she'd made during the blackout callback that felt deliberate and significant. Liam crossed to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, physical contact that grounded them both. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. Not because you don't feel fear, but because you feel it and function anyway. That's not weakness. That's power. She turned to face him fully, and something in her expression made his breath catch. Vulnerability mixed with determination, fear, wrestling with hope, someone standing at the edge of possibility and gathering courage to jump. I don't know how to do this. How to trust someone enough to let them close, how to believe that proximity doesn't automatically mean danger. 3 years of therapy taught me survival skills, but they didn't teach me how to live again, how to want things that require vulnerability. Then we figure it out together. Take it slow, communicate constantly, build something that respects your boundaries while challenging them when you're ready. No pressure, no expectations, just two people learning what it means to trust someone with their wounds. Her hand found his fingers, intertwining with confidence that felt like victory over demons that had haunted her for years. That sounds terrifying. Most worthwhile things usually are. They stood like that in room 51A, while the city hummed beyond windows, while Sterling Tower continued its business around them, while somewhere in the building new employees started jobs that would shape their futures in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The door remained open, symbolic and practical proof that spaces could be reclaimed and fears could be faced, and survival could transform into something that looked like living. Liam thought about the work order that had sent him here 6 weeks ago, the cosmic coincidence or divine intervention that had placed him in exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. Except it hadn't been wrong. It had been necessary, inevitable, the collision of trajectories that had needed to intersect so two wounded people could find each other and begin the complicated work of healing together. He looked at Ariana, at the way afternoon light caught in her hair, and the small smile playing at her lips, at the strength she wore like armor, and the vulnerability she was learning to share. And he thought about Mia's wisdom delivered with 7-year-old certainty. Sometimes complicated things were actually simple if you stopped overthinking them. The woman beside him made him want to believe in possibilities beyond survival, in futures that included more than just functional existence, in the radical hope that wounds could heal if given enough time and trust and gentle attention. That maybe walking through the wrong door had been the first step toward walking through the right ones. Ariana squeezed his hand, and when she spoke, her voice carried tentative hope. Ready to leave this room together. Together. They walked toward the door, side by side, hands linked, leaving behind space that had witnessed trauma and terror, in the unexpected beginning of something that might become redemption. The hallway welcomed them back into ordinary world, but they carried with them understanding that some coincidences were actually destiny, and some disasters were actually disguised beginnings, and some wounds only healed when someone brave enough to witness them decided they were worth protecting. Outside, winter sun painted everything in cold clarity, and inside, two people who'd survived the worst learned to imagine what came next, one careful step at a time together.